My name's Clara. I'm 46, a mother of two beautiful daughters, Eliza, 17, and Katie, 15. And recently, I had to wage a silent war against someone who should have been family but chose to be a villain instead. Let me take you back to where it started. My ex-husband died in a car accident last year. Sounds tragic, right? You'd think we'd be grieving as a family, coming together, maybe even healing. But no. The truth is, my ex was a cheat, a liar. He had a full-blown affair that resulted in 2 children. And when he died, so did his affair partner, which left 2 innocent little boys orphaned. But they weren't my problem, or my daughter's problem. And that's where the war began. See, my ex's parents, an ultra-religious, holier-than-thou couple in their late 70s, decided it was our duty to take in these boys. They demanded it. They guilt-tripped my girls. They even tried to move into our house, without asking. I was still reeling from the emotional explosion of the affair coming to light, and now they were barging in like we owed them something? No. Absolutely not. We were already fighting in court over custody matters they had no business in, but what they did next crossed every single line. It was my youngest daughter, Katie's birthday. She'd been through a lot, so I gave her some cash and let her loose at our local weekend farmer's market to buy whatever she wanted. Sweets, chocolates, silly trinkets. Just a happy day. But about an hour in, I got a call. Her voice was trembling. I could hear she was crying. "Mom, some women, they're yelling at me." "I don't know them." Instantly, my protective instincts kicked in. Eliza and I sprinted toward the market stalls. And there they were, 6 elderly women surrounding my baby girl, wagging fingers, spewing shame, calling her unchristian for turning her back on her grandparents, and worse, accusing her of being cruel for not loving her poor baby brothers. They didn't know, or didn't care, that those brothers were the product of my husband's betrayal, that my daughters had discovered the affair themselves, that they were the ones who broke down crying and told me what their dad had been hiding, that they'd been in therapy ever since. To them, my daughters were selfish little sinners, and I was the evil ex-wife poisoning their hearts. I stepped between those women and my daughter. I could feel my blood boiling. I turned to Eliza and told her, "Go pay for your sister's stuff and wait in the car." Then I faced the mob, and I let them have it. "You don't get to decide what a good Christian family looks like," I told them. "You don't know our story. And how dare you harass a child at a public market?" One of them sneered and said, "You should be ashamed. A real Christian wife obeys her husband and his family." That was it. Barf. Their voices got louder. I yelled back. Eventually, the market staff came over and asked us to leave. So I did, my girls already waiting in the car. But the mob followed me all the way to the parking lot. Buzzards. Circling a woman they thought was weak. But they didn't know. I had all the ammunition I needed. That night, after tucking my girls into bed, I logged onto Facebook. I had a hunch. And it was right. One of the nicer members of my ex's church, someone I still talk to, messaged me after I asked what was going on. He told me everything. My ex-mother-in-law had posted a Hallmark movie-worthy sob story in the church group. She claimed my daughters and I had kicked them out, stolen all the inheritance, and left her and her husband destitute. She painted my girls as cruel, heartless girls who refused to love their baby brothers. And worst of all, she claimed those boys were born through surrogacy, that I couldn't have more kids. So we got help. But then I rejected the babies because they were boys.
That was disgusting. And it was a lie.
But here's where the story turns. See, her church? They have some questionable views. But one thing they don't tolerate at all is cheating. So how did she avoid telling them her son was a cheater? By rewriting the entire story. But I wasn't going to let that lie live. I was still mid-divorce when my ex died, so I had everything. The photos, the texts, the emails, the recordings. Every piece of proof I needed to show that not only did he cheat, but his parents encouraged it. And then bullied my girls for it. The next day, I printed every last piece of evidence. I went full CIA dossier mode, color-coded, high-res, and bound them into nice little binders. And here's the twist. I made them look like hymn books. Yep. Just like the ones the church hands out on Sundays. And then I left them at the back of the church, right before service. When I say the gossip train hit like a freight truck, I mean it. The group chat exploded. Facebook lit up with shock and fury. The picture on the first page, my ex and his mistress making out in my living room, Jason and Emily's love story. That was just the cover. What followed? Conversations, confessions, screenshots, and the piece de resistance, a letter where my ex Emile called my daughters bastards and said it was their fault their father died. That one was dated 2 days after his funeral. The church lost it. The pastor had to personally moderate posts because people were swearing so much. People apologized to me. Some even sent letters to my daughters. And my ex-in-laws. They were shunned, humiliated, cast out by the very people they tried to weaponize. And me? I slept like a baby for the first time in months. Clara's phone buzzed again. A message from the private investigator she'd quietly hired weeks ago. Got something. Meet me tonight. Her heart thudded, but she showed no sign. At dinner, her daughters chatted cheerfully while the toxic grandparents tried too hard to act warm. Clara just smiled quietly. She drove alone to the investigator's office, tucked behind a rundown bookstore. The man, grizzled and precise, handed her a flash drive and a brown envelope. "You were right," he said. "It goes deep, real deep." The flash drive held recordings, conversations between her in-laws and the church elder. Schemes.
Lies.
Donations used to bribe and manipulate. Names of others they destroyed for control. The envelope contained bank statements and falsified documents used to pressure Clara into silence. Clara's hands trembled slightly as she held the evidence. But her voice? Steel. She didn't rush. Revenge, to be right, had to be strategic. First, she visited a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but one known for taking down powerful figures hiding behind religion and wealth. She laid out everything. The next week, Clara's ex-in-laws were served legal notices. Charges: fraud, defamation, coercion, and falsification of guardianship agreements. But she didn't stop there. Clara used the very church events they adored to expose them. She booked a table at the next community fundraiser, and when the microphone came to her for a donor appreciation speech, she stood, calm and deliberate, and spoke the truth. "I was once married to a man who left me for another woman and died without making peace. I forgave that. But what I cannot forgive, what I will not stay silent about, is the manipulation of grief, the weaponization of religion, and the emotional torture of children by people who pretend to be family."
Gasps.
Whispers. Then silence. As she played one short clip of her ex-in-laws mocking her daughters and calling them liabilities. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Church elders who had once whispered about Clara suddenly looked at her with widened eyes. Her ex-mother-in-law tried to interrupt, but Clara raised a hand. "No.
You've had years to speak. Tonight I speak."
A week later, the church issued a public apology. The grandparents were barred from leadership roles. The donations they had funneled were seized. Clara didn't stop. She launched a blog, a place for women like her, controlled by family shadows, manipulated through guilt and tradition. Her story went viral. News channels picked it up. Women across the country began writing in one night. As Clara tucked her daughters into bed, her eldest looked up. "Mom, are we safe now?" Clara smiled softly. "Yes, baby. We're more than safe. We're free." But even then, she wasn't done. She anonymously tipped the IRS on the fraudulent tax returns filed by her ex-in-law's foundation. The investigation was long, but by year's end, their assets were frozen. Their home, a mansion bought on the back of corruption, was seized. They tried to blame her.
Of course they did.
But Clara had recorded every interaction since the day they first threatened to take her daughters. She released them one by one.
Carefully.
Strategically. Quiet revenge makes the loudest impact. Years later, Clara stood at her daughter's graduation, applause ringing around her. A teacher approached and said, "Your daughter wrote an essay about you." It brought the whole staff to tears. Clara held back her own. She didn't clap back with insults. She didn't fight with fists or screams. She exposed the rot with light. She buried them, not in the ground, but under the weight of their own lies. And then she walked away with her daughters, her head high, her silence finally over. Years passed. The wounds, once raw and burning, had faded into quiet scars, faint reminders of the war Clara had survived. But not all scars are ugly. Some are medals. Some are proof you fought back and lived to tell the tale. Her daughters flourished. One became a counselor for women's shelters. The other studied law, vowing to fight for mothers like Clara who'd been silenced too long. Clara, now in her early 40s, stood in front of a packed auditorium, invited to speak at a national conference on resilience and justice. She wore a simple black dress and held the mic not with nervous hands, but with the confidence of a woman who had already lost everything and rebuilt even more. She looked out at the crowd, faces of every kind, young and old, broken and hopeful, and said just one line to start. They tried to break me, but I used every shattered piece to build my power. Applause. Not just for her, but for what she represented. She wasn't just a mother, a widow, a victim. She was a reminder that no matter how much control someone thinks they have, the quiet ones, the ones who observe, who endure, who wait, are the most dangerous of all because they don't react. They plan because they don't scream. They record because they don't beg. They prepare, and when they move, it's over. Clara's ex-in-laws? A name in the news now, associated with scandal and disgrace. Her ex-husband? A memory her daughters had reshaped, not of pain, but of lessons. Her own life? Finally hers to own, and she made it count. She opened a legal fund for single mothers. Started support groups in cities where silence still reigned. And whenever someone asked her how she did it, how she survived betrayal, grief, injustice, she always smiled the same way and said, "Revenge isn't loud. It's patient. It's calculated. And when done right, it looks a lot like success." The crowd always stood for that line. They didn't cheer because she was bitter. They cheered because she was free, and freedom, that's the most satisfying revenge of all. After the applause faded and the lights dimmed, Clara stepped down from the stage, not to disappear, but to begin again. A young woman approached her backstage, trembling slightly, clutching a notebook full of scribbled pain. "How did you know when it was time to fight back?" she whispered. Clara looked her in the eyes and said, "The moment I realized they weren't going to stop unless I did something. And I was done waiting for someone to save me." She placed a gentle hand on the girl's shoulder. "You don't need to scream to be heard. Just aim. Move in silence. And strike when it counts." Then she walked away, not in anger, but in victory. A quiet storm that had already passed, leaving behind not destruction but change. And somewhere, in the memory of every person who had once tried to silence her, she lived on, not as their victim, but as the reason they'd never forget what consequences look like.